Okay, you want to get into the box trucks business. All right, so start with general research. What's the profit margin? Or first start with this. How much does a box truck owner operator make? Now, if you go looking for that, you're probably not going to be able to find general information on that if you do a general Google search. There's not a lot of information on a Google, right, for box truck business, right? You got to really deep down in like some forums, YouTube, things of that nature to find information when it pertains to box truck. And even then when you get into these different sectors of social media, then you got to like wean out all the BS and kind of find creators that actually have knowledge on the space, all right? Right? So, boom, once you find what a general box truck makes, right? Also, before you do that, you need to figure out what sector of box trucking you want to go into. So, you need to research the different lanes, all right, of box trucking, all right? There's a few different things you can do. You might want to do Amazon Relay, right? You might want to go OTR. You might want to do Final Mile. You might say, okay, I'm looking at a Final Mile, but I don't want to do big and bulky. Upon your Final Mile research, you saw that you could do big and bulky, which is going to require another person or two, or you can do curbside, which only requires one person, right? Doing further search, you say, you know what? I could start a moving company. Moving pays more than all these different lanes, right? But that's going to require more people, right? So now once you determine, okay, what sector, all right, you want to go into a box trucking, now you need to see what does it make. Let's say you want to go OTR, all right? You do some deep research, you go to YouTube, you find some good creators, and you settle up on a guy named Mark the Mentor. He tells you the average box trucker that's running OTR right now, depending on their, how they work, what their relationships are, is making somewhere on the low end. On the low end. And just because it's on the low end, that just means those people aren't necessarily working. And on the high end, the average box trucker that I'm seeing right now that I come across that's running OTR is making somewhere between 12,500 a month to 20,000 a month. All right. So obviously that $20,000 a month gross person is averaging around $5,000 a week. All right. Now the majority average that I'm seeing is around 2,000 to 3,000 a week. All right. That's on the grand scheme of things. The average box trucker that's running over the road right now is making about 2,000 to 3,000 a week. I've done multiple polls on this. All right. That guy who's really, really running, he's making somewhere between 4 to 5. All right. So now that you got an average on what a box trucker is making, you say, okay, so if I really, really run hard, I set up relationships, I'm making 20,000 on a gross average a month. That's around $240,000 a year, but that's not guaranteed. That's not guaranteed. And remember, you got to go through the learning curve. So now after you figure out what an average box truck makes, now you need to look into the margins. How much does it cost to run a box truck business? All right. Now, something like this you can find on Google. The general trucking business profit margin are about 2.5% to 6%. Now, you probably gonna look at that. You probably gonna be like, "Yo, that's low." Well, profit margins in trucking are low. Profit margin in trucking is very low. There's a lot of expenses in trucking. There's a lot of fixed expenses. There's a lot of variable expenses, right? There's a lot of unforeseen expenses. All right. So the margins in trucking are low. All right. Now, my career average profit margin 20%, which is great. Now, to a person who's never been in trucking, you're going to think 20% is low, but that's actually on the high end, believe it or not. All right. And I've talked about how I was able to maintain a 20% profit margin. I'm not going to really touch on that right now because I don't want to be on here long. And I'm just telling you, the person who's a new entrant into the space, some of the things that you need to consider while making your decision on getting into this business. And I'm speaking to a person who's starting from humble beginnings, right? So now that you've done the research on the lanes, you've done a little research on what the average box trucker makes, right? And that what the average box truck can make can vary depending on what lane. All right, so up to 20,000, let's say OTR. Same thing with final mile. Amazon can kind of fluctuate because that's really market dependent. There's a lot of variables when it comes to running Amazon Relay. I personally have never ran Amazon Relay. I hear people talking that are content creators that I watch. I know there's one that has two trucks. His trucks average about 140 to $150,000 a year gross. There's another one where someone who sent me a message the other day. He said he made 140,000 this year. So based on the content creators in comparison to subs that I know that dish out their numbers, the ones who have done exceptionally well, the numbers do kind of add up to about 140 to 150. Now, mind you, these are guys that are running hard. These are guys that are running hard, and that's the gross number. All right. So Amazon, let's say one truck about 150 on the high end per truck. Let's say, and this is based off information that I've received, all right, and watched, all right. Can't really attest to it, just for informational purpose. Now for OTR, average, let's say you really running hard consistently, and you can keep somewhere around that 5,000. You're looking about 240. Final mile, depending on the contract, how many days a week you're running, and like I said, depending on the contract. Obviously, if you're running an appliance contract, depending on your market, you're going to do around that $250,000 per truck mark as well. All right, so now that you know how much each lane makes, you know the margins, you break it down even further. OTR, all right, there's more expenses involved in OTR, right? There's more liability, right? More expenses. Why? Because you're running over the road. So you got more variable costs, more fuel, all right, potentially more breakdowns because you're running the truck a lot harder than a person who is running locally. Person who's running locally isn't running that hard. They're not burning that much fuel because they're local. All right. So a person who is local, profit margin may be slightly higher than a person who's running OTR, depending. If you're running curbside final mile locally, you're just depending on you. You don't need a helper. You're doing 15, let's say, stops. You're in a big market that's high density. You may have a tight route. So you're saving a lot more money versus that person that's running their truck hard, OTR. These are all the things that you need to keep in mind, right? You also need to understand your market. There's people that come out here, they watch content, right? And they get all excited and they don't understand how to research and at the business that they're getting into. You got to understand what you're investing in. If you live in the middle of nowhere, you can't be like, yo, I'm going to do final mile, I'm going to do curbside final mile, and then you go out and spend all this money, and then you want to go look for work, and it ain't no work, and then you come to me, and then you get mad at me because I make you feel bad because I'm telling you the truth and tell you should have did all this research before you bought the truck, and you feel like I'm talking down on you and this, that, and the third because I'm not telling you what you want to hear, and then you get mad. This is the research that you need to do before that. Listen, if you're in the middle of nowhere, the only option you may have is running OTR. Ain't no Amazon near you. Ain't no final mile. You live in a city with a population of 15,000 people. You in an area where Amazon sends a truck from the major city 150 miles out to drop off at the post office so the post office can deliver y'all stuff, the final leg or the final mile. They don't have no fulfillment centers out there in the middle of nowhere. They're going to send a relay guy to drive overnight to drop it off at the post office, drop it off at multiple post offices in the middle of nowhere, and then they're going to deliver your stuff. They're going to put it in your mailbox if it's small, like a phone case, or they're going to set it on your front porch. But you had no plans of going OTR, but you didn't do your research. So now you're stuck with this piece of equipment and in the middle of nowhere. Now you're forced to do something you don't want to do, and you don't even want to do that. So now the truck's sitting. This is all the stuff that you got to think about.